back to the Transform Your Mind to Transform Your Life radio, podcast, and television show. I'm your host, Life Coach Myrna Young, and sitting in the guest chair today is Dr. Virginia Campbell, called Ginger. Now, Dr. Campbell and I are going to be talking on the topic, Unveiling the Unconscious and Intricate Workings of the Brain. Dr. Campbell is an author as well as a fellow podcaster. Welcome, Dr. Campbell.
Thanks for having me, Myrna.
You're very welcome. Now, we are going to be having a great conversation on neuroscience and the brain, a topic that I absolutely love because the brain controls everything in our body, and we all know that. So it's also good to learn how it works, and that's Dr. Campbell's specialty. So let me give you guys a brief introduction. Dr. Virginia Ginger Campbell is a physician, author, and science communicator. She's the author of Are You Sure? The Unconscious Origins of Certainty. And she's a member of the Podcast Hall of Fame 2022. Dr. Campbell began podcasting in 2006 when she launched two shows, Brain Science and Books and Ideas. Dr. Campbell spent over 20 years as an emergency physician in rural Alabama. In 2014, she went back to University of Alabama in Birmingham, where she completed a fellowship in palliative medicine. I didn't know what that was until a couple of shows ago when I had someone on here. So now I know what it is, but we'll get into that later. She now practices palliative medicine at the Veterans Administration Medical Center in Birmingham, Alabama, where she enjoys both patient care and teaching residents, fellows, and medical students. Dr. Campbell enjoys sharing her passion for science and especially neuroscience. Her goal is to make these topics accessible to people from all backgrounds, hence the podcast. Awesome. All right, listen. As I said when we started, I'm going to enjoy our conversation. So I'm going to dive right in. Now, in your book, you say that as much as 95% of the brain is unconscious. Are you talking about the subconscious brain? And if you are, how does that apply to our everyday world when 95% of the brain is unconscious?
Okay, so I don't really like the word subconscious just because it sort of implies the Freudian subconscious, which is not been confirmed by neuroscience. Freud was right that much is going on that's unconscious, but the idea that we suppress things and repress things has been pretty much debunked by science. So that's why I like the word unconscious. It basically, I'm referring to the fact that most of the processes of the brain are not accessible to our conscious awareness. For example, we are not aware of how our brain does vision. That's the reason why even when you look at one of those illusions, even when you know it's an illusion, you can't you still see it, right? Because the processing is not going on at a level you can control. Vision is a really great example because, first of all, it's one of the best studied things in neuroscience. And secondly, we have learned, believe it or not, 100 years ago, there were people who thought that vision was totally conscious. And now we've learned that so much processing even starts at the level of the retina in the back of the eye. So this unconscious amount of unconscious processing is really important because it's what allows us to do many of the sophisticated processes we associate with being human, which is the second question, part of your question is, why does it matter? So, for example, reading, right? If you can't learn to, the first stage of learning how to read is you have to be able to decode automatically. And automatically is another word for unconsciously. So there's really two pieces of this unconscious. There's the part you could never get to, like your visual processing. And then there's the things that you learn how to do and they become automatic, right? Like walking. Or I've just moved to New Zealand, so driving is very much on my mind because I'm driving on the left side of the road and I keep turning on my windshield wiper when I meant to turn on my turn signal, and the turn signals are even upside down. And it really, I feel like a teenager again. I'm not even turning on my radio because I'm having to concentrate so hard, because none of driving on the left is not automatic to me yet after 50 years of driving on the right. So really, that old saying, he can't walk and chew gum at the same time, right, is kind of a way of saying that person's not good at doing things automatically. But the key idea here is that we do not have access to most of how our brain creates our experience. This is actually a good thing, since we've learned that our spotlight of attention, if you would, is very limited, right? That's why multitasking is a myth. Young people might think they're good at multitasking, but all they're really good at is switching quickly between tasks. And even young people, it has been shown convincingly that their performance is also impaired by trying to do things that way rather than one at a time. So really, we need this feature of our brain, that it's doing all these things unconsciously.
Yeah, wow, that's good. I got a couple of circle backs there. Yeah, so, or unconscious, which could be what you're talking about, automatic pilot, where, if you're driving someplace all the time, your unconscious brain just takes you there. But now that you're in New Zealand and you are learning to drive on the left side and to operate a car and all that. But before I go any further, isn't that supposed to be you're a neuroscientist, so isn't that good for you? Like learning a new language is not helping isn't that rewiring neurons and stuff? Isn't that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good thing you asked that. Yes, I plan to address that on my episode later this month. Yeah, I've been telling my listeners, for almost 18 years, learn new things.
Yeah.
But I have to admit that over the last, I've only been here a little bit over a month, and there have been times when I have really been somewhat overwhelmed by the amount of newness, and I felt a little homesick for not just for familiarity and my golden retriever.
Yeah. So that's going to help you with your brain. So that's one thing. Now, the second thing that's really that is kind of like new information for me is that, you uncoupled the subconscious and the unconscious. Now, I've always coupled them together, and I've used them. Like, for instance, there's a time when I worked on sending things to my subconscious brain, because all the gurus tell you that your subconscious brain drives manifestation. So if you can get stuff to your subconscious brain, then your subconscious brain is going to do the work for you. Let's say, for instance, that I want to get a specific guest on the show. If I can get it to my subconscious, then my subconscious is supposed to get pathways for me to have that. But when you're talking about the unconscious, you're almost talking about the automatic nervous system, right? So
yeah,
you break that down a little bit more for us.
Yeah, so there's really what you're calling the subconscious is part of what I call the unconscious, which is where that 95% comes in. Now, when I say 9, and that's an estimate, not all of that is not all of that is unconscious. You can't get to it. Some of it is like what you've talked about, but where it really comes from is realizing that unconscious, and I just use unconscious for the whole thing, and I don't use subconscious. Some people might use the other. There's a lot of debate in the field about which word we should use. Some people don't want to use either word because they want to get away from the pseudoscience that's been associated with these words. But the principle is that, like you said, you basically have told your unconscious or subconscious, whichever word you're using, I want to get this guest. It's the same thing as when you have a complex decision to make, right? And you decide, if you're wise, that you're going to sleep on the decision. Right. And then the next morning you wake up and you're like, now I know what
And you've got
I'm
it.
going to
Yes,
do, right?
yes, right.
And that's because your unconscious is taking all the things you know about that decision and processing them and coming up with something that feels right to you. And that's a feeling we've all experienced. Robert Burton calls it the feeling of certainty in his wonderful book on being certain, believing you're right, even when you're not. He was a guest on my show back in 2008, and his work is really the inspiration for my work. And he graciously, allowed me to use material from several of our interviews in my little short book. But yeah, I mean, the thing about using your unconscious or even your intuition, which is a form of that, because that's when you get that feeling about something and you can't really consciously figure out why, obviously if you're walking down a dark street and you feel that something bad's happening, you need to take action right away. But most of the time, if it's an important decision, you probably need to take that intuition and also compare it to the facts before you make a final decision. That's why I like the sleeping on it as a principle, because it really sort of uses both pieces of the puzzle. Maybe you sat down like Benjamin Franklin and he was the one who invented this idea, by the way, of writing your list of pros and cons. You've done that, but you still feel stuck. Right. In fact, it's even been shown that the more complicated the decision is, the harder it is to try to make a decision using that method. You really need the second piece. And when you realize how powerful all that information is that you've got in your brain, you can use it. And that's really why I think that this is valuable information, is because it's a practical application.
Yes. Okay. So that's amazing. All right. Now one of the other things from your work that I wanted to touch on is that something that I only learned recently. And if you told me that maybe when I was in my 30s or 40s, I would have said that's crazy. But but you're saying that everyone's memory is unreliable, right? So the things that you remember is not always true. And that is an amazing thing, because the fact that you're saying you remember it should mean that it happened. But apparently your brain does certain things. And after I heard that, I went back into my subconscious or unconscious and tried to think about things that happened and if I'm remembering it correctly. But then my brother and I stopped arguing with him, by the way, because I would say this happened and he would say this happened. And now I just let it go.
Right. And that's right. That's the best. That's the example. In fact, you mentioned in the pre-information you sent me about you and your brother remembering your childhood differently. And that is exactly the experience I've had with my own sister, who is only a year younger than me. So a lot of our childhood, we really were side by side, and we don't remember it the same. And sometimes it's even really important events. Like my sister's memory of what happened when I broke my arm is very different from mine. So that's kind of weird, isn't it? But as far as why memory is unreliable, it turns out that memory is not like a video camera, okay? It's not like you make a single recording and it gets stored away someplace in your brain. No, what actually the neuroscientists have discovered is that what happens is every time you recall a memory, your brain recreates it in all the parts of your brain that experienced it. So like the visual cortex will light up the way you saw things and so on. But the problem, it's not a problem, but it's a feature, is that your brain is going to insert stuff that you've learned since the original event.
Wow, that's
big. Yeah, that's big. I mean, it has huge implications for our justice system. I think we really need to they need to interview people at the scene of an event and record it and not ask them again. Because as soon as you start talking to other people, you're put your bits in. There's a famous study, usually known as the Challenger study, where they related to the Challenger disaster. They interviewed a bunch of, I think it was probably college kids, because that's the way psychology studies are usually done. But they interviewed them about what they were doing and what they felt at the time that they either saw or learned of the Challenger disaster. And a couple of years later, they talked to them again. And amazingly, only 25% of them gave the same account. And the weirdest part was there was a guy who he's like looking at his own account that he wrote down and says, I know I wrote that, but what I remember now is right.
Is
now,
right.
That's stubborn. That's stubborn.
Wow.
But so you might ask, well, why? And we have to think about, what is memory really for? I mean, we tend to think of memory as being for the purpose of providing an accurate record. But what if memory is for survival? Okay. So if it's for survival, then I need to have a way of incorporating things I've learned between some big event that I remember and the future. So I stuff new things in. I want to give you one more example. I'm of the generation that the first really memorable event in my life was President Kennedy's assassination. And, you know, we sat there for, are you old enough to remember that?
Yeah, but I wasn't in the country. Mine would have been like Princess Diana's death or something. You know what I mean?
Okay.
I wasn't here.
But
I
anyway,
heard about it, right?
but one of the things that happened was everyone was watching live TV for like 3 or 4 days in a row. One of the things that happened was that Jack Ruby shot Lee Harvey Oswald. It was on live TV. Okay. Now, forever, I've assumed that I saw that. But now, after I learned about this, I was like, you know, it's possible that I didn't actually see it. You know, that I just saw the replay and think I saw it because everybody saw it, right? And that's the way, and I bring this example up because there's one other important point, and that is it does not matter how powerful or how much emotion is attached to the memory. People think there's this idea of flashbulb memories, that these memories are special, more accurate, but the studies of this have shown that that's not true. So you can't use your emotional feelings around a memory to judge its accuracy. And like you talked about your brother and not arguing anymore, that's one reason why I use this as my best, simplest example of why neuroscience is important, because there are a lot of family feuds and other kind of feuds and political feuds and various feuds that are around this issue of remembering things differently, right? Yeah. So if we took this into account, you know, maybe we could have a little less conflict.
Right. Yes. But like I said, when the first time I heard it, I almost kind of rejected it because I'm saying to myself, it's called memory. How can it possibly? Now, I know that the things that you remember, like you just mentioned about emotion, you know, your brain and your heart is recording every moment of your life from the time, maybe even when you're in the womb, I think. But you can only bring, that's what I heard, you know, you can incorporate this or not. But I heard that the only thing that you can remember, like, is that the ones that has emotional charge to it. So you go back and you think, well, how come I don't remember that? And you remember it, right? So that's what I heard. But you also said something about why is memory important? And it's true. I mean, you know, I do a lot of reading and watching a lot of stuff, and I came across this idea that if you were to wake up tomorrow and all your memory was gone, you wouldn't even know how to walk to the bathroom, you wouldn't know how to brush your teeth, you wouldn't know anything, you wouldn't know how to get around your house, because everything is depending on your memory, right?
Well,
no,
I'm not sure, you know, like say something like knowing how to walk, okay, which we tend to call muscle memory, but it's probably neurological and it's in the unconscious. We actually forget almost everything. I mean, if you look at the amount of information that's actually coming in, a lot of it, vision again is a great example, because we don't even see most of what goes into our eyes, because like I said, it's getting processed from the beginning. Right. So along with this idea that our memory is imperfect, you need to add the idea that we actually forget more than we remember.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's okay, because there's been a few rare examples of people who remembered everything, that really did have perfect memories, and it drove them crazy.
Yeah, I know, the photographic memory people, right? Yes.
They have, they can't see the forest for the trees, as they
Right.
say, because they can't find what's important,
Right.
among all the detail. It's just like, you probably don't remember what you had for lunch last week unless you happen to eat the same thing for lunch every
Every
day.
day, right,
Unless
right,
but if
exactly.
you went to lunch with a special friend one day last week, you probably remember that because it was,
Right.
it stood out. But,
Right.
10 years from now, you probably might remember that lunch and not remember what you had to eat anymore.
Right.
Because what really matters is that you had lunch with your special
With your
friend.
friend, right.
Okay.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, well, that part I knew from a long time
but
ago, because
just
right.
what I want to say is it's really important to make this point. It's not getting stuffed away somewhere where you can find it later. Okay, because that's the myth. And that's what runs repressed memory therapy, which has been totally disproven, but most people don't realize the reason it seemed all those weird repressed memory things of making crazy accusations sort of disappeared in the mid-90s, because Elizabeth Loftus showed how easy it is to instill false memories.
Mm.
And I was at a thing once where she was giving a talk, and she showed pictures like you would do like in a lineup. She managed to get, she showed us the person, and then she showed us these comparisons. By the end, she was able to get more than half of us to pick the wrong person. And I would just tell your listeners, if you're interested in learning more about this subject, a really good book is called Mistakes Were Made, but Not by Me, by Carol Favris, and I think it's Elliot Aronson. It's about cognitive dissonance, but cognitive dissonance is important because it's the reason why cognitive dissonance is, to put it simply, trying to believe opposite things at the same time. Trying to, when you have two things that are contradict and you've got to try to resolve them, which feels very uncomfortable. But she has good examples in the book, and one of them is why the example of psychologists refusing to give up repressed memory therapy despite the fact that it's been proven to be inaccurate, and why, what it is about people that make them do that. And there's another chapter in there about how police, think that they have this gut that tells them who's wrong, who's the criminal, and they will, they'll deny DNA evidence, right? Because they're sure they know who did it.
Intuition.
Okay.
Right.
So yeah, so these things can be, as much as I like certain TV shows, it sort of bothers me when that, the main character is always,
That's
it's
all.
always
That's all fiction.
yeah, but but that book, Mistakes Were Made, but Not by Me. It's in its 3rd edition now, and I highly recommend it.
Yeah, I'll put it in the show notes. I'll probably even get it myself. But all right, I want to circle back to the repressed memory thing. Are you saying that if you have trauma and you repress that memory, that's bogus? That's not true?
Well, if you actually look at the people that are having problems with bad things, it's not the fact that they repressed it, it's the fact that they remember it.
Oh.
Okay. Think about the people who have PTSD. They're not having repressed memories. They're having memories that are just bothering them all the time. Okay. So that's actually the bigger source of pathology. I mean, I cared for a dying veteran several years ago who had run over a small girl in Vietnam when he was 18, back in the Vietnam War, and he was never able to get over that event. He became an alcoholic because he was trying to get rid of the pain and guilt he felt about that event. And then
that makes sense.
But that's why I talked about how we forget many things. So let's say, well, I'll give a personal example. And a very personal example. I was actually born before my parents were married, but I didn't actually know about this until like I think a teenager, except I don't remember that. I remember discovering it when I was about 30, and my sister said, no, we knew that. Now, how could I forget that? So then I was a little bit mad at my mother, and I said, well, why didn't we talk about it? And she said, well, because you didn't seem to be upset.
So you didn't
But,
remember it at all.
my point
Right.
is, I had totally forgotten this really big thing.
Wow.
Right. And I don't think there's anything wrong with me.
No.
But so forgetting is normal. Okay. So, you might work with a therapist and you might remember something you don't remember, you don't remember, but don't call that a repressed memory. Just call it something you forgot. Okay. And
like
if
that.
it's and a good rule of thumb, and this is especially when people are working with children. First of all, therapists have so much power, and I worked with one once who was trying to make me have memories, and I just quit going because it was clear to me she was projecting her own issues on me. But if somebody starts telling you, especially a small child, something really wild, like, they made me eat spiders or something, that probably didn't happen. So if you do have a memory like that, I think it's really good to, before you jump to the conclusion that this person you've loved forever is now a horrible person, because that's the common scenario, that you look for corroboration before you jump to the conclusion that that person did something horrible to you in the past, because it might not be. It's really, that's why I mentioned the false memory part.
It's very true.
And so, we laugh about how our siblings have different memories to us, but that's pretty harmless. But there's other situations where this idea that repressed memories are to just be assumed to be true can be very dangerous, as ruin people's lives. So that's why I think it's important.
That's true. Wow. You just said a mouthful there, because a lot of people are coming out coming out with this, the Me Too movement and things that are, they're making claims that happened 30 years ago.
Well, I'm not talking about that, because I think that I trust most of those claims, because women, for most, we're talking women, having come through medical school 40 years ago, women did not, there was nothing you could do. You could not speak up.
You didn't speak up. Okay.
And there is no reason why, as I see it, there's no reason why a woman should make something like that up, because look at how they get treated.
Okay.
They get attacked, they get death threats.
Right. Okay. Well, I wasn't saying making it up, but I was just saying,
but I mean,
what you're saying, that
but usually those people
things and push it in. No. Okay.
Yeah. Usually those people aren't claiming that this memory has come back to them suddenly. Usually it's something that's they've been keeping to themselves for all these years, because they had no power to do anything with it. Just like, and I'm sure that, as an African-American woman, you've had experiences that fit that mold also.
Right. Exactly. Okay. All right. Well, it's good to clarify that, because that's what just popped into my head when you're talking about, the memory could be from experiences that not necessarily happened to you, but your brain puts it all together. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But so most of these, one other thing, most of these cases, have you noticed that it's usually not one person, right?
It's
usually if one
yourself,
person,
right?
Usually if one person speaks up, other people speak up.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that that's significant.
Yeah.
It's that one person who breaks the ice that person's the one that's really got the guts, in my opinion.
Right. Yes. I get you. All right. Now, you also say that understanding the brain makes us more tolerant. How's that? What's the connection there?
Well, first of all, we talked about the role of the unconscious, and I mentioned Robert Burton's work. One of the things that he talks about is how this feeling of certainty comes. It feels like it's coming out of nowhere because you aren't accessing the unconscious processes that lead to it. And so that means that even when we feel really sure about something, we could be wrong. I mean, two people can look at the exact same evidence and come to opposite conclusions. And so since that's the case, maybe we should be a little bit more humble and more tolerant. And this is something we could certainly use in the current climate of division and polarity, is because everybody is so sure that they're right on both sides, right? And we might not be. I mean, you have to have that feeling of certainty. You can't operate without it. It's another one of those things that we probably have for survival, because if you think about it, if you were, walking, through the plains of Africa, and you thought you saw a lion, not a tiger, because they're not in Africa. You saw a lion, you would need to take immediate action. And if it turned out that it was just the wind, that's fine, because if you wait to see whether it really is a lion, too late.
Right.
Right. So we need, and I knew a person, my sister had this roommate in college who could not even decide whether she wanted to go to the movies. Okay.
Oh, wow.
So she was basically, I think her mother had been making all her decisions, but at any rate, you have to be able to feel sure, even when you say, well, what do I want for lunch? You go, I feel like I want X, right? And that's what you want. So, right. So, and another day you might feel like eating something different, and you don't really control what you feel like eating. It's a benign example, but, otherwise you just be frozen with indecision. So feeling certain is a good thing. And also we tend to follow that person who projects the certainty, right? So then they become our leaders, but that doesn't mean that they're always right.
Okay. So what you're saying is that knowing that you might not be right should make you more tolerant of the other person. That you could be wrong. That could be another way of putting it. Right. Okay.
Yes. I mean, and you'll never think that you're wrong. I mean, that's the nature of certainty, is that you're certain, right? So it's a big challenge to say, yeah, I'm sure I'm right, but I'm going to tolerate this person who believes the opposite. That is really, really hard to do. And seems to have.
Well, when I was in school, we did debating, and that means that you're arguing both sides, and a lot of times you could even be swayed because the other point seems so good. So that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, but except now we're in this situation where people only listen to the people they already agree with, so they don't,
Right. Yes, you turn off the other person. Okay. All right. Now, one of the other questions I have here is, how does your brain create or experience?
Okay, so the most important thing to this question is understanding that you are not a brain in the vat. Okay, your brain does create your experience, but it doesn't do it in isolation. It does it via the interaction of your brain with your body and the world around you. Okay, so, but did you ever see that Lily Tomlin, Steve Martin movie where I can't remember which one of them is like?
It's like the one, the shrinking person?
No, the brain is in the thing like in Futurama where the people are. Anyway,
the point is when she was shrinking. Right. Okay.
Okay. But anyway, sorry I got off track there. But the point is that the brain, it's not just the brain, because sometimes people get this idea that it really, we are embodied beings. Our body is very much a part of our experience. There's this idea of the Umwelt. I don't remember what the name of the scientist, some German guy, came up with this idea. And it is the idea that every organism has a different world experience. For example, dogs, they can smell lots of things we can't smell. So they really the world they live in is a world of smell. We are visually, a majority of our brain is devoted to vision. So our experience is very visual. That's just a simple example. Both of those experiences are created by inputs from the world. If your brain was just sitting there and did not have any sensory inputs, you wouldn't really be having any meaningful experience.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So that's basically how the brain creates our experience. Now, I always thought that the brain controls everything that we do. I mean, as far as our body, how it works. Just yesterday, I was listening to somebody that says that the brain is such a supercomputer that nothing scientists have ever been able to do is able to replicate that. Like it's got billions of neurons and all the different things that it does. But yeah, you come back to the fact that it is connected to the outside world through vision, and I'm almost sure all our other senses. So how does what I see create my experience though? Break that down for us.
Okay, so for example, you know that there's a blind spot in the middle of your retina, right? But you never see that. That's the place where the nerve goes, blanking on the name, the nerve connects that goes to the rest of your brain, the optic nerve. So there's a blind spot there, but you never actually see that blind spot because your eyes are constantly moving around, creating, and you have this sense that the world is stable, even though if you look at a person's eyes, they're really moving around. So this is a good example of what the brain does. It knows that your eyes are moving around, and it cancels that out. So that's an example of how it does it. It has to, you can't tickle yourself, right? Because your brain sort of erases that, right? But I want to address one thing you said just a minute ago about the brain creating our experience and being a supercomputer. When they first started to do robots, they could not get them to do things like walk. And it's because they weren't taking into account the body. So, for example, we have muscles in our legs that have a certain springiness to them. And when we walk, that springiness is part of how we walk. Okay, that's not actually in our brain. So our brain uses that as a part, but our brain is not running a, long differential equation to walk. I mean, the scientists actually tried to do this with the computers and the robots, and it didn't work. They really didn't make any progress until they started to figure out that they needed to take into account the body, and they started making things like little automated insects and watching how they would walk and things like that. So I just want to emphasize the importance of the body, because there's this big idea out now that you would just like upload your consciousness from your brain and that would just be you. And there's a lot of problems with that idea. It makes great science fiction, but it just ignores so much actual science. And part of it is the role of the body cannot be underestimated. But this is another one of those things we take for granted. As we age, our body changes, and we adapt. And you think of
changes too, right?
Yeah, gangly teenagers tend to be a little uncoordinated because their body's changing so fast, right?
Right.
So I just really want to emphasize there's actually a whole field called embodied cognition that emphasizes this, and it's important for things like education. For example, there's evidence that one of the things that can help children learn how to read is learning to write their alphabet, even though it's all scriggly and scraggly, and that's actually a good thing, because one of the things we can do when we know how to read is we can read letters that aren't identical, and we see all these crazy things as A's, and it appears that part of what helps us to learn this, what's known as invariance, is trying to write that. So, if you want your kids to learn how to read, you want to do two important things before they go to school. One is read to them, so that they learn reading as something desirable and pleasurable that associate it with being bonded to you. And the second one is when they get ready, let them write. And I don't mean type, I mean physically write.
Right. Of course. Right. Yes.
That's
Yes.
an example of using embodied cognition in education. I had a really good interview with two women who are in this field last year on brain science.
Right. Wow, that's a good tip. That's a good tip. It's amazing. All right, well, let's get to your book. Your book is called Are You Sure? The Unconscious Origins of Certainty. So tell us about that particular topic, and then why did you write the book? I know you talked about some of the book was some of the work of another professor. And what do you want people to walk away with after reading your book?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, I was inspired by the work of Robert Burton, and he graciously allowed me to use material from several podcast interviews, which I used to create both the first and second editions of this book. So my goals were to give people a sense of why neuroscience is important. And also, I just wanted to share these ideas that we've been discussing with people who might not listen to my podcast. The funny thing about this book is it's not in an audio book form because it was originally audio to begin with, and people can listen to the original audio. So it always is funny to me that I get a request for the audio, version. It's just that because a good chunk of it is an interview with Dr. Burton, the voice acting part would be quite expensive. But yeah, I mean, it's really that I wanted to reach people who, podcasting is becoming more and more mainstream, but there's still a lot of people who don't listen to podcasts. So my real goal is to reach the people who might not listen and to give something to my listeners that they could share with others.
Okay. All right. So what is the main message in the book? I mean, it's talking about
the main message is pretty much what we talked about, which the main message is that in the title, the main message is that certainty has unconscious origins. That is the main message.
Okay. All right. 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 Okay. All right. All right. So yeah, I get you now. Are you sure? Okay, I got you. Yeah, some seeing basically what you're saying. Yeah, and that's basically what we've been talking about. Yes, that's amazing. All right. Well, yeah, I mean, you just expanded my consciousness on the fact that some of the things that I've picked up here and there about memory not being, being certain, and you have allowed me to actually, cement that. And yes, when you're talking to someone and they remember something totally different from you, be tolerant on that, because you're understanding that that's how they remember it. So that's good. So yeah, so thank you for being on the show, Dr. Campbell. Thank you for the work that you do in your podcasting. So now tell our listeners about your podcast again, and where they can pick up a copy of the book. You mentioned it's not an Audible, but it's on, hard copy. Right. Also, your social media handles and your website.
Okay, so let's start with the website because that's the easiest, brainsciencepodcast.com. And you can listen to Brain Science in whatever app you like to listen to audio in, and even on YouTube. If you go to brainsciencepodcast.com, you can find, a listing of all the guests and all the episodes and all the books I've ever talked about since 2006. If you'd like to get my free newsletter, you'll see a box at the very bottom of the homepage for that. But you can text Brain Science, all one word, to 55444. And if you sign up, you'll get a free handout called 5 Things You Need to Know About Your Brain. And that's just a free gift. Brain Science, all one word, to 55444. But if you don't like texting, there is a link on the website. And my social media handle is Doc Artemis, Docartemis. That's after the Greek goddess Artemis with a doc in front of it. And
Okay. Repeat
and
that one
I
again.
there
Repeat that for me again.
Docartemis. I will admit that I'm not the most active social media person, but I usually do post, episodes and stuff like that up on whatever X. I do have, I'm on, what's that new one? Mastodon also, for those of you that are, there's actually a nice little neuroscience instance on Mastodon if you're interested in neuroscience.
Okay. Yes.
And there is a Brain
Science.
Science, there is a Brain Science podcast page on Facebook.
Brain Science Podcast. All right. Okay.
And a YouTube channel. The YouTube channel is also called Brain Science Podcast. So it's pretty easy. Oh, and there's an app in the Apple and Android store called Brain Science Podcast.
Oh, wow. Nice. Okay. So Brain Science is the tag word, except for your social media handle. Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So that's amazing. All right. Well, I will definitely, there will be a transcript of my conversation with you on the show page, which is blog.myhelps.us. And I will link out to your podcast and your website and your social media handles. And of course, I'll have the information on where they should text if they wanted a copy of your free newsletter. I like that. 5 things that you need to know about your brain. Is that what you said it was?
Yeah. And I want to say something about my newsletter, because I know that a lot of us have signed up for newsletters, and then you get these drip mailings, where they send you something every day because they want to sell you something. My newsletter is not like that. It only comes out once a month when my show comes out. It's the show notes, so that you know what the show's about and don't forget to go and listen to it.
It's a good idea. It's a good idea. All right. Okay. So that's amazing. All right, guys. Well, listen, thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Transform Your Mind to Transform Your Life. Today, we talked about the brain and, memory and learning how the brain works. So definitely, if you want to know more, follow Dr. Campbell on her podcast, on her social media, get her newsletter, and pick up a copy of her book, so that you will be armed with the right information to make your brain work better. So thanks again, Dr. Campbell, for being on the show. Any last words before we wrap up?
I forgot to say that my book is on Amazon and all the other e-sellers. Yes. Paperback or ebook.
Yes. All right. Yes, I will definitely link out to it from Amazon. Yes, that's almost a given. Yes. All right. Well, listen, thanks again for tuning in. If you're listening to this on iTunes, we'd love for you to rate and review and subscribe so that we can reach a wider audience and get this wonderful information out to more people. If you're watching on YouTube, we'd love for you to subscribe as well, so that you can, just like, Dr. Campbell says, you get information about the show. And, my show is weekly, so you can get information on the show as it comes out. So I appreciate you guys tuning in, and thank you very much. Until next time, namaste.